And we are now recording. So welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. And we're gonna do introductions very soon, but just as some housekeeping, all of you should be muted. Please stay muted for the entire session, just so we don't get background noise. And the panelists, of course, will not be muted when they're talking. But if you have any questions for the panelists, please enter them in the chat box. It's on the bottom of your screen. There's a little bubble, and you just enter in your question, and we're going to address those questions in the last half hour. So from 4 to 4:30, we'll address those questions. With that, I do want to introduce one of our fabulous webinar co-organizers. She's actually the person who got me into the Macro Social Work Network and ACOSA. So I'm very honored to introduce Dr. Becky Sandler. She's the field advisor at the Silberman School of Social Work at Hunter College and a past chair of ACOSA, which is the Association for Community Organization and Social Action.
Toss the ball back to you to introduce yourself and as we move through this, but as we gather today, I just want to acknowledge our particular context of this global health crisis and express my appreciation for you having bandwidth to join us. We may be grieving, struggling, exhausted. However we are, I just want to encourage you to be as present as you can. We will make the recording available as a link, and there will be a survey sent out after this just for your feedback and to find out if there are other topics that you would welcome as we start building this capacity for the Macro Social Work Student Network. So again, welcome, and I'm grateful that you can join us today, and hoping you're all staying safe. I want to start by saying I am actually subbing for Tamara Willis, who will be jumping in and joining. She is the liaison to ACOSA from the Macro Social Work Student Network, and she is out doing macro work. She had a Jails Coalition meeting and at the last minute said, I will jump in later. So you will see her, and maybe Alberto, when Tamara comes on, you can jump in and we'll have a space to introduce. So I'm just giving a brief intro before I'll toss it back. And it's basically to ground us in what's the purpose of this time. The Macro Social Work Student Network has been around for a bit. It started at Silberman School of Social Work, University of Connecticut, and other schools joined in. It was originally a student project. And we have been slowly but surely trying to expand that. And a couple of years ago, ACOSA, which is a professional organization for macro social workers, decided to sort of be the holding ground for it. And so that it is a program and a part of ACOSA, but on its own. And Alberto and Tamara we're just so grateful to have you both on as leaders for this effort. There are chapters around the country, and there is interest around the country. We have held open phone calls, and what we found was that there was a whole bunch of questions around today's topic. What is macro social work? What are careers in that? What does it look like? How do I look for work? And then there were a bunch of questions about how do I get a chapter going on at our school or university. And so today the purpose is that one group of questions about careers in macro practice. And we can, as this works, if this is successful, we'll be holding other webinar topics. And for those of you who may be new to the idea of macro practice, I'll just finish by saying, macro social work practice is the big picture part of our profession. It is when we're working for change at the agency level, the community level, the system level. it is using our social work skills at this level. And that can look very differently. But as we like to say in the field, it's not an either or. So it's a whole range of places to practice our skills, and macro is at the bigger picture, bigger organization end of things. And just as a note, there are professional networks and affiliations within macro practice. You've heard of ACOSA now. I also want to give a shout out to our United for Macro Practice partners, a mouthful, but that is in working with organizations and management and leadership. There is the Network for Social Work Management, and you can look these up as you know after we get off, and we have these resources listed on our website. And there is Influencing Social Policy, and that is for work at the policy level and the policy practice level. And there is also a Twitter chat collaborative, #MacroSW, which has a Twitter chat on a topic every Thursday night at 9 p.m. Eastern time. And I encourage you to, as you're interested, look at these other networks, check out the websites, check out membership, and please be in touch should you have any questions or want to get involved or learn more. And our email is well, you got it, actually, you found us here, but we will send that out with the link to get so that we can stay in touch. So without furthermore, I'm hoping that has allowed people to join and get warmed up. I'm going to turn it back to our illustrious facilitator. I am just thrilled that Alberto Cifuentes Jr., who is an LMSW and a PhD doctoral candidate at the University of Connecticut, is going to lead us in this webinar. And he has a particular experience and gift in this, in that he is the facilitator for a network of macro social work practitioners in the state of Connecticut. So he is an invaluable resource, and he has really stepped up, and we are really grateful to have you, Alberto.
Thank you so much, Becky, for that lovely introduction. I'm very humble. Thank you. And by the way, I know Becky talked a lot about some of the resources that ACOSA and MSWSN offers. We're going to send that all to you after the webinar, so you'll get that, so you can follow up. But I'm very happy to be doing this. This is actually, I've done 3 in-person career panels, macro career panels. It's the first time I've done a virtual one, so I'm really excited. I'm going to do it very similarly as I've done before, in that I divided the questions that all of you have submitted when you registered. A lot of you submitted really wonderful questions, and my colleague Tamari actually distilled it into 10. I don't know how she did it, but so we narrowed down those questions and grouped them into 4 categories: general skills and training, getting the job, challenges and concerns, and of course, resources. So those are how we're going to structure this discussion until 4, and then around 4, we'll get to your own Q&A as revealed in the chat box. So without further ado, I do want to introduce our wonderful panelists. What I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce them alphabetically by last name. I'm going to give just their little brief bio, and then they're going to make their opening statement about what brought them to a career in macro social work. So our first panelist is Maryam Kiefer, LMSW. Maryam is the Associate Director of Policy and Advocacy at the Coalition for Behavioral Health, representing over 100 community-based mental health, substance use, and social service providers in New York City. Prior, she was the director of the New York City Regional Planning Consortium, the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. Take it away, Maryam.
Thank you, Alberto. So again, my name is Maryam Kiefer, and what brought me into macro social work, I actually came from a direct service background prior to getting my MSW at the Silverman School of Social Work at Hunter College. I worked for for a few years doing Hurricane Sandy disaster recovery work. And so I did direct services with families and individuals impacted by Hurricane Sandy. And prior to that, I worked with refugees in the Middle East. And so when I was thinking about getting an MSW, I saw that I felt that I could do more work to serve my clients from a broader macro level than working individually with clients. And so that's what brought me into macro social work. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you, Maryam. All right. Our next panelist is Landon Osborn, LMSW. He is the program manager of Connecting Through Literacy, Incarcerated Parents, Their Children, and Caregivers, or CLIC, which provides services to families impacted by the justice system. He currently serves on the board of the Community Child Guidance Clinic and on the Advisory Council of Bereavement Care Incorporated.
Can you hear me?
Yep. Go ahead, Landon.
Hey, how you all doing? How are you all doing? My name is Landon Osborn. I actually, Alberto was one of my peers in the MSW program at UConn. We both had a focus on community organizing. But what brought me into macro social work, actually my first idea of social work was DCF. And then it evolved, and I just wanted to help my community. I come from a community that was struggling. So I wanted to help in any way I could. I found social work. I thought I'd be a school social worker and help people individually. I'd be in clinical practice. But as I learned more about social work in general, and I got to know more about UConn and their specialization in macro social work, I felt like I'd make a bigger impact on my community by getting involved in community organizing. And actually, when I went to get my MSW, although I was in community organizing, I put myself in position to learn more about macro social work practice. So I took classes in admin. I took internships and just policy-focused internships because I didn't know much about policy. But as I got further into my MSW, I realized how much of an impact macro social work makes. And we know social work is generally known from clinical practice or group work, but we need more social workers in macro practice. And I felt like being involved in macro practice, understanding what goes on and the power of macro social workers, I felt like it was important for me to stay involved in macro practice and just try to make the biggest impact I can for my community, for my city, for my state, and throughout the country.
Thank you, Landon. Okay, our third panelist is Precious Price, MSW. She is the director and community organizer of the Middletown Racial Justice Coalition and was featured as one of Connecticut Magazine's top 40 under 40. She organized with the North End Action Team and served as an intern for both Senator Chris Murphy and the Congressional Coalition on Adoption Institute.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for having me, Alberto. I'm really excited to be doing this. I love doing things like this. And like you, this is my first virtual one. If you hear a baby screaming behind me, just please be patient. So how I got into macro social work, I actually was in, I had a degree in psychology. And so I was doing a lot of micro work. I worked for DCF. I grew up in foster care, so foster care was always the route that I thought I was going to take. I thought I was going to become a DCF social worker and, or a counselor and help people individually. I did it for about 6 years. One of the things that I became really passionate about was the over medicating of kids in foster care. And I wanted to learn more about that. And I realized that that was a systems issue. And I didn't really know what that meant at the time. So even when I applied for the School of Social Work at UConn, I'm wearing my sweater. Even when I applied, I didn't know much about macro social work, but I did know that micro social work wasn't really hitting on the deeper issues for me. And also, I had a degree in psychology. And so to be honest with you, I felt like I was learning the same things. I was paying a lot of money to be at a school to talk about Freud and things that I had already learned and practiced for about 7 years. before going to the School of Social Work. And so, and the funny thing is, I used to roll with all the macro social workers, like not on purpose, but they just were so cool, and they were doing all the really cool protests. And so when I got to the School of Social Work, when I had been there for a while, everybody thought I was a macro student. And I remember professors coming up to me and saying, like, why are you not in the macro practice? And it was simply because I didn't know much about it. So when I learned about community organizing, I was like, yeah, this is it right here. I like this. And so I, jumped into it. I was doing protests. I had always been an advocate around foster care issues. And so I dug deeper into that. When I graduated from UConn, I went to DC for a little while to do some policy work around around foster care, and then came back to my own town in which I had grown up, and got into doing community organizing for just neighborhoods, and then realized that like those deeper systemic issues were really what I needed to focus on, and racism was one that was personal and passionate for me, and so that's how I got into the work that I am in today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Precious. All right, and lastly, we have Rachel West. Rachel founded the Political Social Worker in 2012, which focuses on issues related to advocacy and community organizing. In addition to her consultancy work with organizations, she offers career coaching and training to macro social workers.
Hi, thank you for having me here today. So what drew me into macro social work is that I had started out, my undergrad is actually in history. So I went to Stony Brook University, which at that time taught from a social history perspective. So think like Howard Zinn type of perspective. But I was looking because there's not a whole lot of jobs out there for historians other than just going off for a PhD and trying to get a job. So I was looking for a career to move into that address things like social justice issues. They did a lot of work around my history degree around history of civil rights movement in the US. So what I really liked about social work was when I read the NESW Code of Ethics and Values. That's what I liked, that focus on social justice issues. So that's when I decided to apply for an MSW program. So that's really what kind of pulled me into macro. So I kind of started out, I guess, already, even though I didn't really fully know what macro practice was, I guess I already kind of started out that kind of background and interest in community organizing and doing social justice work. Pretty much it. I could go on longer, but
Oh, well, you have plenty of opportunities. But before we do that, I have just been alerted that my wonderful co-organizer of this webinar, Tamari Willis, has just been able to join in. So welcome, Tamari. She is our liaison, our coastal liaison to the MSWSN. She's also a PhD candidate at Wayne State University. Tamari, would you like to say anything before we start with the facilitated questions?
Nope, continue on.
Okay, well, you'll hear more from Tamari later as she guides the Q&A for the audiences, for the audience Q&A. All right, so let's start with talking about the general skills and training that's needed for macro social workers. If you could respond to what kind of skills, trainings, or aspects of your education really prepared you for macro social work? Anyone can start.
First, if no one else, if I didn't step on any toes. This is Precious. So I think the main thing for me was being active. So for me, it really wasn't the classroom. And that's what's so interesting about my learning. Like I felt like the classroom was secondary to the personal experience that I was getting from my peers at the UConn School of Social Work and my professors and the things that they had done outside of the classroom, like the classroom, the theories, all of that is amazing work. But for me, it felt empty until I started to do the things that we were talking about in our books. So I think for me, the practice piece of it is just do it, try it, see what you like, see what you don't like. Organizing can be fun. It could be very draining. It could be very hard. And for me, it's just trial and error with this right now.
Okay, thank you, Precious.
Hi, this is Maryam. I'm probably going to give a bit of an unpopular answer, but in my work that I do at the Coalition, a big part of my job is representing our member agencies, and particularly around regulatory reform, particularly around Medicaid regulatory reform. And so one of my big jobs is reading very, very dense, very, very boring material and being able to translate it to our member agencies, but also being able to translate it for legislators. And so having really strong reading skills and really strong writing skills, but also being able to tailor your message depending on who your audience is incredibly important in macro social work.
Wonderful. Anyone else?
For me, it's similar to Precious. It's really just being active with my peers and in my internships. I think I learned a lot on the ground. I put myself in positions that I didn't think were the most comfortable. Like I hated public speaking, which I mean, I was always nervous about, which I'm still a little bit to this day, but at the same time, putting myself in those positions. I'm sorry. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Someone is sharing content. But anyway, it's okay.
Just in short, it's really just my experiences on the ground. Being really take what I got in class and really put that into action. It's cool to learn about it and memorize it and things like that, like program development, different things of that nature. And it's important, but I think it's not it didn't leave much of a it left an impact, but not as much as me being on the ground and working with my peers and working in my internship and taking action.
Rachel, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I was going to say a lot of what I picked up macro actually came after I graduated in a way. I went to a program that was a generalist program at the time, so there wasn't like a macro track to take. My second year field placement was at the local LGBT center here on Long Island, which at the time was just called Legally. And that was started by a social worker. It actually grew out of his, it was like a thesis paper that he wrote in his final year in his MSW program. So it was founded on social work values, and he was background was in community organizing work. So I was able to get a certain amount of macro experience in that placement, but a lot of it was really kind of post MSW program stuff. So really a lot of it was just going out into the job market and getting some experience working in the field, doing some continuing education work, some additional sort of like what I like to refer to as like strategic volunteering type stuff that I got a lot out of.
For those of us that are not very familiar with macro social work, with the types of jobs, because often a lot of these macro social work jobs aren't advertised as wanting people with MSWs. What should people look for? Like, what kinds of jobs, if you want to get into macro social work, like what are like the buzzwords or the keywords or like certain positions, certain roles that macro social workers could take within an agency or as a consultant or?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah.
Go
ahead, Rachel.
So that's a great question, because I think that's something that gets very confusing when you're just coming out of your program. I think the reality is that unless you're going to be looking to do like clinical supervision type work, which I mean that can qualify as a macro position if you're providing a social work program. You got to be aware that like a lot of those jobs that you're probably going to be qualified for aren't necessarily going to say macro social worker. They're not even going to be exclusive to social workers. Because when we're out there and you're looking at macro jobs, what we would refer to as macro jobs. Those are positions that people with backgrounds in, coming out of law school or coming out of an MPA program or MPP program or public health program or science program would also be qualified for. So I think one of the most important things I could tell you is don't stick to job boards that are just for social workers. Look for job boards that deal with nonprofit jobs in general, such as idealist.org, for example. And kind of be aware that using keywords is important. So just be aware that if you're typing in something like MSW or BSW, this job search, it may not come up with the right kind of result that you want. You need to think a little more broadly about the job terms that you're using. As they think about the specific job you want, there's a lot of different jobs that would fall into macros. That could be community organizing, it could be grant writing, it could be something in nonprofit administration, it could be doing something in the political arena, legislation or policy analysis.
I also just want to add to what Rachel has described, which is definitely on point, is we might be competing against individuals with some of the degrees that Rachel had mentioned. And what's really important is for us to distinguish, why are we different than those degrees? What have we learned in an MSW program that makes us different and unique? And honestly, I'm obviously biased because I'm a social worker, more qualified to do this work. A mentor of mine had said, as a social worker, the one advantage we do have is we can see things on the micro level and we can see things on the macro level as well. And especially when working in policy work, that perspective is so incredibly important.
If I can also jump into, as far as job searching, I would have to say that like maybe this might be a little unorthodox, but social work is all about building relationships, right? It's all about who you know. Like my job did not exist before I came into it. Like I knew some folks and they knew that I was passionate. We knew that there was an issue that we wanted to tackle and it was going to take us a long time. And so we created a job. I mean, we can have a whole conversation about funding and nonprofit and grants and all of that stuff. But I will say that a lot of networking is about who you know. If there is a place that you've heard of that does amazing work, volunteer, go down there, introduce yourself, send an email, ask to have coffee, ask to have lunch. I mean, I remember when I was interning on Capitol Hill, even some of the folks that worked in Chris Murphy's office was like, how are you getting lunch with like legit senators and Congress folks and we can't even talk to anybody but their staffers? And I was like, I emailed them and asked them to have coffee with me. Like, I didn't even know you couldn't do that. Like, I didn't know that was taboo on Capitol Hill because I was just doing it. And people were saying yes. And it was all about like not being scared to put yourself out there as and looking for what you really want to do. And again, trial and error, go and volunteer at some places and see if it works out for you. And you're also meeting folks, so they will let you know when jobs come about. Like I am extremely attached to the Macro Social Work Network and the one that Alberto has been, doing an amazing job at keeping track of, like sending out job postings and things of that nature. And, and I wouldn't have known that without contacting Alberto. So it's really about introducing yourself and creating a network for yourself that's really going to help you get the job that you want.
Thank you. Landon, do you have anything to add?
Same sentiments as everybody else. As far as for me, networking was key. Although I've been working this full-time job since I've graduated, which I actually found my job on Idealist. It worked. And I actually got Idealist off the political social worker website. So it all, but I've done a lot of stuff. doing research projects, creating programs, assisting people with putting nonprofits together, part-time employment as well. It's all come through networking, and just letting people know what I do. Just in normal conversation, I'll pop up and talk about some of the things I do, or reach out to people who have a similar background, or whoever else is involved in criminal justice that may not be working with children and parents. They may be working in mental health, and I've reached out, and we set times where we can have a short meeting in person. Now more meetings are happening on Zoom, so just utilizing all the tools I can, and networking is definitely key.
Thank you. So you all talked about ways to market yourself, because often a lot of these jobs aren't necessarily looking for people with MSWs. Maybe they're looking for people with MBAs or Master of Public Policy, Master of Public Health. Like, how can you market yourself in sectors where they aren't looking for social workers necessarily? Do you have any advice or tips for that?
I would say get involved, whether it's on a volunteer basis. Like I said, networking again, but it's connecting with people, and being creative as well. You're connecting with people. I created a fatherhood program, but it was all through me knowing somebody and saying, hey, I mean, this is a great idea. This is what I do, and I think I can do this, and showed them a program that I wrote up, and we found funding, and I had a part-time job. So I mean, that happens, and just putting your work out there. I mean, social media is powerful as well. You know, just asking around, if anybody knows anything about this. If you're interested in working on criminal justice issues, does anybody know a criminal justice program I can get involved with? As Precious mentioned before, reaching out to people, just putting yourself out there.
Wonderful.
I can also give an example too of just like when you hear things that sound like social work, even if you're just like having a conversation with someone. I know for instance, the public library here just created a position for a social worker, and they were looking for a librarian. And I was like, that sounds like social work. And like the things that they were asking them to do, like which was checking into people, connecting them with services and things of that nature. I was like, that sounds like a social work position more so than a librarian, even though librarians are great. Social workers are great too. So, and what they did was they went through a lot of red tape because it was made for a certain degree. It was made for all types of different things, and they changed it and they hired a social worker. Um, Simply because of that conversation. Folks really don't know that we're out here like that. And so just having conversations when you see something that says that, oh, you're looking for this type of thing. Do you know that social workers are actually really equipped to do that very well? Give them some examples, introduce them to some folks that you know might be interested in that position and do it well. And just really, really all of the work that I've seen in macro social work and getting jobs and all of that, it's all been self-advocacy. It's all been advocating for each other, especially as micro social workers. Like, I mean, I'm not the most popular person even within the NASW because I fight so hard for macro social workers. And so just really advocating for each other, I would say too. And definitely being involved, ditto to Landon and others.
Thank you, Precious.
Yeah, I also just wanted to add, never let the job description prevent you from applying. Submit. It's not, even if they're not asking for a social worker, if they're asking for somebody with a master's in public health or public policy, still submit. It doesn't hurt. And also draw those lines, as Landon and Precious had been talking about, draw those lines for the interviewer. Make it clear to them that your skills, background, expertise, and experience is directly related to this job description and that you can do this job. The public, really see social workers in the clinical role. They don't really see us in this macro role. And so part of our job as macro social workers, in addition to all the different things we do, is to educate individuals that yes, we can do this work and we are suited to do this work.
Thank you. Rachel?
Landon was saying about social media. I mean, I would certainly say, depending on what you want to do, look into how you can put yourself out there on social media. So looking at platforms like Twitter and LinkedIn, but also thinking about whether or not it may be worth starting your own blog or writing for existing blogs in the field. That's one way to build a reputation for yourself. Writing articles for existing periodicals or journals, even an association newsletter. Those are other ways to kind of get yourself out there and start building a name for yourself.
Thank you. So this is a really good segue into the more practical aspects. And you have to get a job. You have to submit a resume. You have to do the interviews. So the first part, what suggestions do you all have based on your own experiences for your resume in terms of making yourself more marketable and that a social worker is needed for this position?
I can start. I've interviewed hundreds of social workers for different positions, and my biggest piece of advice is do not send a generic resume. Read the job description and tailor your resume to that job description. You don't need to recreate the wheel every single time, but if I'm looking for a position where I'm looking for a candidate that understands healthcare, understands Medicaid, make sure that those terms are in your resume or in your cover letter. And if you don't have expertise in those areas, that's completely fine, but do a little bit of research, do a little bit of Googling online to get that information there, or talk about how your experiences in your cover letter are related to that job description.
I would also say one of the things that I did when it came to my resume is I went down to the Department of Labor and asked them did they have any resume classes. I have what's called a running resume, where it is literally like 6 or 7 pages long, and it's like everything that I've ever done in my life, right? So so that I can use that to create the resume based on the job that I am applying for. Like Miriam just said, I never send a generic resume, and I always use those key terms. When I was in the School of Social Work, I was listening to some employers say that they don't even look at the resumes anymore. They run them through a system, and if there's no key terms on it, they're not calling you. So make sure that you are, paying attention to the job that you're applying for, and that you're applying for that job.
Yeah, I would say it's really important to make sure that you're not just using a generic resume or cover letter. I'm also going to say make sure that you do your research. So if you know the organization that you're applying to, you want to get access to whatever materials from them you can. So visit their website, look through what they've posted, visit their social media sites and look at what they're posting, what they're talking about. If you have somebody in your network that you know is somehow affiliated with that organization, ask that person some questions about the organization. So make sure that you do like a thorough job learning as much as you can about the place that you're applying to, and let that help you kind of figure out how to best craft your resume and cover letter.
And do you have anything to add?
I would just say, somebody else said, just tie your cover letter and the skills that you put on your resume, just make them match the job description. And also don't underestimate yourself. Just say, I did this for this. You want to list all the things that you've done in this job, whether it could be just recruiting volunteers or something like that. It's not just what you generally in your main job, it's other things you may do that may attract those who are hiring.
And so the other part of this, and it's very anxiety inducing, I know for many people, is the interview and the second interview and the third and the fourth. I remember having a part-time position that required 3 interviews. It was very odd, but what are some of your recommendations for interviewing best practices for successful interviews?
I can go first.
Precious, go
So
ahead.
mine are, so I, when we were in DC, we had to do tons of interviews. We did mock interviews, we did real interviews. I was offered a couple of positions from mock interviews in real life. And I think the most important thing, two things that I've learned from interviewing is, one, you are also interviewing them. So if this is not an organization that you want to work for, don't try to fake the funk, because they can tell. Um, uh, Make it so that this fits. Find an organization that you really believe fits you, and then go into the interview and absolutely be your full self. And so I have, been to interviews where I was just like, I don't at all think I'm going to get this, so I'm just going to be as honest and candid as I can. And then I got on an offer. So, and then I also had a panel interview with like 20 people on it. Like, I had never seen anything like that before in my life. And by the end of the interview, we were laughing and joking, and because that's just the type of person that I am. And so if I can't come here and laugh and joke also on top of my work, like, this probably isn't the place that I want to work anyway. So just know that you're interviewing them, and be yourself, and work for a place that will allow you to be your full self.
Thank you.
So I'll just add on to what Precious said, but definitely being yourself and understanding what you're getting into or what you're applying for. I mean, I've had some failures. I bombed some interviews, and I think it was because I wanted to just be so perfect, I would say, and just get all the answers right instead of just naturally just letting it flow, and why I feel like I'm good for this position and what I can do. And I think I've stumbled in those situations. Um, it can get you down, but at the same time, you got to keep it going. That's another thing. Don't fret over failure. I mean, it comes with the territory. Just keep fighting and be naturally yourself when you're going into these interviews. Prepare. I'm not saying not to prepare, but also just don't get so uptight that you feel like you can't breathe while they're interviewing you. So that's all I have to say on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to add to what everybody else has said, yeah, do some research beforehand, while you're doing some research when you send your resume and cover letter. Do some research or once you get a call for the interview and you have the date set, do a little bit of research on the organization, on the position, on any key areas or buzzwords that are in the job description. Interviewers generally aren't looking for you to have a perfect answer for everything. Want to hear, kind of your thought process, how you know this information or where you got this information. And it's perfectly fine to say that you don't know or you don't have the answer, but as a kind of good piece of good advice, think about sharing, how you might get that answer. Even though you don't have the actual answer, say, I would maybe look it up here or check this out. It definitely shows initiative and some curiosity, which is definitely what interviewers are looking for. Also, show up on time. I know that sounds very small, but I've interviewed a lot of people, and people have showed up maybe an hour late to an interview. So definitely show up on time, show up a little bit early, and check, if you're taking public transportation, make sure that the trains and buses are running on time, or if you're driving, make sure you know the route and traffic beforehand.
Thank you. Rachel?
I don't know if I really have new that I can add to this. Pretty much what everybody's been saying. Be yourself, and again, like, you are also interviewing them as well. You certainly, part of it too is figuring out if it's a good fit for you. There's nothing worse than like agreeing to take a job that just that certainly had made that mistake when I was younger myself. Yeah, I would say make sure that you're prepared to go in there, that you have some general understanding of the organization and what they do. You can try to find out about like past projects that they've worked on. You just go in there prepared and understanding as best you can what the organization's needs are and what they're looking for. That's pretty much it. I just pretty much agree with what everybody was saying about just try to be yourself. And
Can I add one more thing too that I feel like is super important?
Yes.
So one of the most important things I learned about the interview is, whether you think you got the job or not, please send a personal thank you to the person who is interviewing you. It just looks good. Even if you don't think you got the job, you don't want to work there, you hated the person who interviewed, just send a personal thank you, an email or a card or something like that. It looks really professional. Like I said before, social work is all about building relationships, even with people who you may not like. So so just make sure that you continue to be personable throughout the process.
Thank you, Precious. I was just thinking that, so I would have said something about that if you hadn't. So thank you. Um, so, so to be very relevant, and it's something that Becky brought up in the beginning, looking for a job, any job, is very different now during a pandemic than it was, say, a month or two ago. So what do you think the implications of COVID-19 are on the job market for specifically macro social workers? I mean, it's affecting employment, it's affecting job searches in general, but for macro, like, what do you think the implications of this pandemic, since we don't know when it's going to necessarily end? What are the implications, and what kind of advice and resources would you offer to other macro social workers who are trying to find jobs or engage in macro social work?
Speak a little bit about this,
So go
because I
ahead.
currently live in the epicenter of the outbreak in the country. I live in New York City. And so it's both. There's pros and cons to this. I'm going to start with the strengths-based approach. I'm going to start with the pros first. There are a lot of very specific jobs that are related to COVID coming out right now. And so thinking about macro social work in the terms of grant writing and funding, there's so many grants out right now, and organizations need grant writers, need macro social workers to look at these different grants to apply for organizations. So that's a good thing. On the more clinical social work side, and not to say that you can't go back and forth between clinical work and macro work, or incorporate macro work into your clinical work, many organizations, especially in the mental health and substance use field, are switching over to what we are doing right now, telehealth and telephonic care. And so I've seen lots of job postings within the past few weeks looking for social workers to do remote care. So those are kind of new emerging job opportunities coming out. Kind of on the negative side, a lot of funding is being pulled from programs. So here in New York City, I don't know if those of you on the call are familiar with the Summer Youth Employment Program, but that funding has just ended. The mayor has just ended that. So that has huge implications on those workers that work in those programs. And this is probably here for New York City and New York State, not the first round of cuts we're going to see to programs, because a lot of funding and resources is being shifted over to address the current COVID epidemic here in the city and in the state. So I would say my advice would be to be as open-minded as possible. And there's a lot of webinars taking place right now at the city, state, and federal level on different COVID-related funding resources. So regardless of what state check out your state departments of health website, your city departments of health website, and the federal websites. So FEMA, Small Business Association, for different funding opportunities, because organizations are going to be looking for people who have that expertise and knowledge.
It's great, Maryam. Thank you. Anyone else?
Thank you so much, Miriam, for saying that. The way I'm looking at this is a bit the same, a bit different. I would say that, that definitely naming the cons as funding is very much being shifted. My own organization has seen some funding shifts on the state level. And so, but I will say though, as a macro social worker, in my experience, there has never been a better time to talk about how systems work and how systems are killing us and how systems are, operating to keep things where they are and are not helping people. I think this is an opportunity to be creative as far as macro social workers, and creating those jobs to really provide those opportunities for people to learn more about how we can fix this stuff. So I think everything is being shown. The manifestations of racism, the manifestations of poverty, the manifestations of all of these huge isms are right in the forefront of all of us right now. And I'm not saying, use that as an opportunity to to do more than, I mean, so what I'm saying basically is to use that as an opportunity to really, as a macro social worker, provide yourself some opportunity to, one, talk about that, see if there are jobs that are willing to begin to have that conversation that weren't having that conversation before, like our healthcare fields and things of that nature, and then like really advocating for folks in this time that we're seeing being left behind due to COVID. I hope that made sense.
Thank
I know
you.
what I
No,
was
it
trying
did.
to say.
It did. Well, I think the next series of questions I have are very targeted towards certain panelists. Um, I'm personally interested in being an independent consultant or being an independent contractor, and I know Rachel is one. And there was actually a question about that, about what sorts of skills and expertise might a macro social worker need to have to serve as an independent consultant. And I know this is an option during this pandemic to do that. So, Rachel, what are your thoughts? What are some tips, advice as an independent consultant that you have?
Yeah, so what are you consulting on? Is a question you have to ask yourself. Because consulting is just like a very generic. So that's the first thing to figure out is what are you going to be consulting on? Are you going to be like a grant consultant? Or are you going to be doing like consulting on media, on communications? So it's really like figuring out exactly what you're going to be offering, what services you're going to be offering, what's your area of expertise. Um, Otherwise, yeah, I mean, it's you certainly need strong communication skills. Um, you do have to, I would say, like read up more about marketing because essentially you're going to be doing everything on your own to some extent, unless you decide to go into a partnership. In which case you're looking for partners who maybe have certain expertise in areas that you don't. Um, but it's a small business. You're it's not just the fact that you need to be offering up like using your own expertise, but you also have to have some general understanding about how to run a business. So that includes things like how to market yourself, how to communicate, um, how to get yourself out there. You have to have a certain amount of understanding about finances. So definitely, if that's something you're interested in, um, I would say start doing some research around how to run a small business. Good place to start, and really think about whether or not you feel like that's a good fit for you. Because you may be really good, let's say, at grants, and maybe that's the area you want to pursue. But do you think you really have what it takes, or feel comfortable doing what you need to do to run a business? Um, Also be aware to see, like, I mean, there's some downside to that in that you don't have like a regular salary coming. And certainly when you're starting out and you're looking to build your clientele, like your paychecks are probably going to be spotty. Because consultants, we talk a lot about like feast and famine. So it seems like there's times where like you have a lot of clients, and then you can have weeks and weeks going without any clients. So you want to think through all of that before really deciding if you want to jump off and just do that. There are some people who do consulting on the side. There's some people that have a regular salaried position, and then consulting is their part-time job. So I say just kind of like think through it carefully and just start doing your research. You talk to other consultants in the field, talk to them about what the pros and cons are of it. Just realize that it's kind of like a different lifestyle in a way than what you would experience if you were an employee somewhere. That has both plus and minuses to it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Can I jump into Alberto as a contracted
Yeah,
person?
sure.
I'm
Go
I'm
ahead.
also a contracted person.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Rachel, because I did not know anything about contracting or small businesses. I didn't even know that I wouldn't have access to healthcare. I was like, well, where's my package? And they were like, of what? And so I had to learn all of this as I went. I had to learn the rights of contractors because I didn't know even if I could take a side job because I do have a salary as a contractor person. So it's a really weird and tricky situation. I had no idea of things like, wow, I work from home so I can put my light bill on my taxes. Like I didn't know any of this stuff. So just making sure that you do your research, that you understand what contracting is, understand the difference between an employee and a contractor, learn about your fiduciary organization, learn how to market yourself. If you are going to do things on the side, make sure that, because one of the things that I do on the side is I give talks about racism. And so I have to make sure that those things remain separated because I do run a racial justice coalition and then I do talks on racism. So you have to make sure that as a contractor you're not stepping on your own toes or stepping on your organization's toes. It's a lot. And it is a harder practice than to me than being an employee, and it's just something that you don't enter into lightly. Just know that's what I would say.
Thank you. Thank you. We're going to get to the Q&A soon. But before that, this is actually a question for Maryam. Given her that she started off as a clinician, there were some participants that had a question about going from microclinical social work, that they had been doing it for a really long time, but they now wanted to focus or shift to macro social work. What's your advice for that, and what would their next steps be?
Yeah, so I can speak kind of about my own personal experience around it and then give some advice around it. So I was very fortunate when I was doing direct social services. I had a wonderful supervisor who knew I was in graduate school and knew I was focusing in macro social work. And so really helped me search for opportunities within my current position to be able to do some more macro oriented work. And so I was able to participate in lobby days at the city, state, and federal level for our organization. That was really kind of in my paid work, the first time I was really able to engage in policy and advocacy work and really enjoyed it. I also was able to do group work at my organization as well, give presentations to groups, and then also do some research in our community as well to see what were some resources that our communities needed and how could I help connect those communities to those resources, either by building out programs within the organization I was working at or referring clients and communities to other organizations in the community and building those linkages and networks. So if you are in a current clinical position, I would say, as much as you can, if you trust your supervisor and you're getting that really great support from them, start that conversation with them, and also do some research within your own organization. And as the other panelists have talked about, come up with a plan, come up with a suggestion at your own organization and see where it goes. And then if that does not work, you now have new skills and experience to put on your resume. And so you can put that and apply to positions, more macro leaning positions at other organizations.
Thank you, Maryam. Well, that concludes. I have two more questions, but I'm going to say that we have time. Let's get to the Q&A. Tamari.
Sure. So I have some questions that come in here. And so the first question is, I want to know everyone's familiarity with social entrepreneurship. Have you all seen people doing it, and how are they funding their projects usually?
Yeah, I can, because actually I'm a co-owner in a social entrepreneurship. Becky mentioned at the top of MacroSW. So I am one of the founding partners in MacroSW, and in 2018 went through the process of incorporation, and we chose to incorporate the Benefits Corporation here in New York State. So in terms of funding, see that kind of depends on exactly what it is you're going to be doing. So for some social entrepreneurs, they would go for like crowdfunding. It may be they bring in money by selling either goods or services that they're producing. There are some grants out there that will fund for-profit social good organizations, so you can look into that as well. Have, with any business, you could have like angel investors as well. So there are different types of ways you can go about funding, and a lot of that really does depend on exactly what your organization is going to be.
And I can contribute to this because at Wayne State, I'm part of a community that kind of really builds a curriculum around social entrepreneurship. We have a conference around social entrepreneurship. So I won't spend too much time, but if you want more information about this, you have my email address. You can email me. I can send you books. I can send you webinars. I can send you things that you need to know. All right. Thank you so much, Rachel. Next question. It says, more generally, what are your thoughts on jobs in nonprofit that are grant funded and are at risk for being cut? How can we professionals, and some of us as parents, position ourselves in the field and not be cut and be able to provide for our families?
I can take that question because that's happening here currently in New York City to some programs. And so I would say kind of at the start, do some research, kind of look at how much is this program being funded kind of before, why is funding going away? So even though there's a current global pandemic happening right now, programs get cut a lot. I can speak, for example, when I worked in the Hurricane Sandy program, it was originally a 1-year grant funded program. We got really fortunate and got additional funding later on, but then after the need was no longer needed in the community, the program started to phase out. And so kind of thinking about what are the reasons why the program is being cut, who's the funder and who controls the funding, and then also thinking about who influences that funder. So here in New York City, the mayor is very much influenced by the media. And so thinking about, do we need to do a media push around this? Do we need to show legislators how does loss of funding impact the community, impact their constituents? And so when you look at, when you're organizing from that perspective, you have to organize from a variety of different perspectives and layers. It's almost kind of like a campaign in and of itself. Also one more thing, also think about other allies that can join you in this advocacy effort as well. So service recipients, other organizations, and other communities to build voice and build power around potential cuts or cuts to programs.
I don't have much on the broader spectrum. I can just use my personal experience to answer this. I knew that my program was going to be getting cut. And like I keep saying, this is all about relationships, right? So I actually went to my funder and had a conversation with my funder who, like really thought very highly of my personal work and decided to fund my moving to a different position in a different organization. So those types of things are all about self-advocacy. We're not all stuck in one block. Like, introduce yourself to your funders. I worked for an organization that couldn't get this particular funder to fund anything for them. And I met the person. I took her out to coffee. I asked her, I was like, why won't you fund this? And she was very candid and very honest. And we fixed those things, So there may be some opportunity to either advocate for yourself or your organization. But I think that thinking outside of the box as far as like being proactive about keeping your job or keeping your position or keeping your relationship so that other opportunities when they present themselves will be presented to you. I think that's extremely important too.
Thank you so much, Precious and Maryam, for that response. The next question, can macro social workers work in emergency management for response to natural disasters?
Yes, so as somebody who has worked in natural disasters and in emergency management, the answer is absolutely yes. And there's um, so many different routes and different positions you can take in emergency management and disaster response. So you can work at the client level, you can work at the organization level, and you can work at the government level as well as city, state, and federal level. So there's so many opportunities in emergency management. And even during non-disasters, many nonprofits and organizations have, and also government agencies too, have an emergency management department or a team of staff that look at how do we make sure that during a disaster, our programs can still maintain and still be running and functioning. So even during non-disaster times, there's still an important emergency management component in organizations.
Any other comments on that? All right, next question. Thank you, Maryam. Is around licensing. The question asks, how does obtaining a license in social work help supplement the work you're doing as a medical practitioner?
For me personally, although I'm involved more so in nonprofit development, I still facilitate groups in state facilities with incarcerated men. So getting my I was kind of iffy on getting my license, but going through that process, although we did get some skills in school as far as on the micro level, I think the license helped me a lot more as far as understanding the importance of facilitating the group, and also how just working in groups and in the facilities has helped me from a macro standpoint, really understanding what's going on and being able to bring that to coalitions, bring that to groups and let them know this is what's going on in the facility. This is what these guys are complaining about. These women are complaining about. These parents are complaining about. This is what the resources they say they need. Because sometimes when you're detached from micro workers and facilities and things of that nature, because I work in prisons, you kind of get a different idea of what you think people need. But it's better to meet people on that level and just being able to use my license and facilitate those groups. I've been able to really get their messages across to those solely in the macro field. And then also just having that license, like me getting side jobs, doing things like that. I think sometimes seeing that license, people are like, oh, he's an LMSW. Oh, he definitely can do this job. So that's a small benefit as well.
Thank you so much, Landon. The question that
Sorry, I just want to add also, social work is such a fluid job and profession. And so at this point in your life, you might be very interested in macro work, but later on in your career, you might be interested in more clinical work. So having that license allows you to be able to do that work. And then you maybe later on, you're interested in macro work again or a supervisory position. This varies on state, but here in New York State, to supervise students, MSW students, some schools require you to have an LMSW. So if you are interested in the future, even if you're a macro social work and you want to supervise MSW students, check your state's requirements, but you might need a license.
Any other comments on that question from the panel? Thank you so much.
Oh, I was questioned a lot about whether or not it's worth getting a license if you know you want to do macro right off the bat. I say it really depends on where you live, where you plan on practicing, because the laws are all different. So I'd say definitely do your research and find out what you're allowed to do with just an MSW. Because truthfully, what I do, I probably don't need to be licensed. I've never held a job that required me to have the license. And I'm here in New York State. So I would say it really kind of depends on where you are and what your goals are. But as Maryam said, like, you don't know down the line, like 5 or 10 years from now, you may decide you want to do something else and that would require you to have a license to do it. Like she said too, some states you would be required to have the license in order to supervise. So if you're ever going to be in a position where you think you may end up having to supervise MSW students, you may have to have that verification.
I was going to say I am not licensed. I'm the only person on this panel who is not licensed. As thinking about it, because it was definitely something that I thought about doing, but I really couldn't figure out the why. So I appreciate the answers that I'm hearing as of the why. I hadn't been told these things when I was a macro social worker. I mean, I've talked to macro social workers that have been in the field for a very long time, and they couldn't even tell me the why. And so I didn't. I was just like, I've not needed it yet. Nobody has asked me about it yet. I do have a lot of clinical experience. I would say most of my work has been clinical experience. I do know that that is not somewhere where I'd like to head right now, back to. And so I just, for me personally, have not seen a need to be licensed.
Just want to add one more thing as well. And so if you're interested in the government route, civil service title, it's a kind of a whole other realm. We haven't really touched on it yet. Civil service titles, even if you're doing macro social work, sometimes a civil service title will require you to be licensed as well. So if you're interested in that government route, really read the fine print.
Thank you. Thank you all for your responses. Next question. What are your recommendations for a recent graduate regarding salary negotiations? It's a good one. More money. How do we address that?
I can speak on this. So it depends on what type of job you're applying for. So I'll talk about it from government because I've worked in government before, and I'll talk about it in the nonprofit sector. For government, most of the job postings are posted with a salary bracket. And so it will say specifically, if you have X years of experience, this is what the salary is. And a lot of times those are government set, and a lot of times they're non-negotiable, but it really depends on the government and on the position. So it'll vary depending on city, state, or federal jobs. They're also tied to what I was talking about, a civil service title, and sometimes a classification or code as well. So you want to do some research on that. For nonprofit, sometimes it's good to check to see, as we talked about earlier, whether or not the position is grant funded. So sometimes there's not much wiggle room, but these are great questions to ask in a job, in an interview. It's always good to not be the first person to share the number. If you can get the employer to share what the salary bracket is, it's good. And then you can kind of assess whether or not this is, what you're considering. But also in terms of what kind of your own internal process, what's going to be a sufficient salary for you. So think about what your obligations are, but also what your skills and expertise is. And then you can also do research online. The name of the website is escaping me right now, but there are Glassdoor is one of them, but you can kind of see what similar positions at other organizations are hiring at. So you can get a sense of, what's kind of the ballpark range for this position, and whether or not your expectations are kind of in line with that salary. But also advocate for yourself. If an employer offers you a salary you feel is too low, either not sufficient for the position or something that you could not survive on, it's always okay to say, is this negotiable? And start from there. And also think about not just the salary the position in terms of salary, but also think about some of the other benefits as well. Healthcare, vacation, comp time, flex time, the opportunity to work from home, things like that.
Just add on, I guess, definitely salaries are important, but also look at the benefits. What is this job going to do for me as well? Are they going to be assisting me with getting my CECs, health benefits, things of that nature? I know getting into my job now, 5 years ago, I didn't think anything about it. I was just like, all right, this salary and it's something I love to do. So I got into it. But over time, now I got a family. Now there's things going on. Now I got my license. Now I got all this stuff going. I had to go back in and negotiate for a higher salary because it wasn't something I thought about. And I wasn't guided on. I know that I asked the question before applying to jobs, but definitely look at what the job could also provide for you as far as professional development and safety.
I would also add to make sure that we are all applying pressure on the NASW, because that says a lot about how much we make. Also, I am a community organizer. Am a contracted person, so I was able to set a decent salary for myself. When you think about, I don't get a benefits package and things of that nature. But I know social workers who are literally, I mean, organizers who are literally working at minimum wage that have master's degrees. And like, to me, that is a systems level issue. That is not their issue. And so I do think that the field of macro social work needs to fight harder to express that we are a position that is worthy of equal pay to micro social workers. And that is absolutely something that I fight for, and I genuinely believe that we have to do a better job as social workers. And so you may need to do that on an individual level, because there's no way in hell, oh, excuse the language, there's no way I'm working with a master's degree at $12 an hour. I'm not going to do it. I don't care if it's you're not going to be able to negotiate that much higher either. Like, so it really is a systems level issue as far as like how we think about macro social work and how valuable it is. And so I hope that we are all still pushing on that advocacy level on the NASW also.
Thank you so much. Can you please inform me on how to begin research and developing programs that deal with health disparities in particular populations?
Again.
Can you please help inform me on how to begin research and developing programs that deal with health disparities in particular populations? So questions about like how to begin engaging in research and leading that into then program development, particularly around health disparities.
I can talk about it a little bit from the New York State level, because there's a lot of work going on right now with health disparities, particularly with Medicaid. So I would say kind of looking at and there's lots of different health disparities. So looking at what's currently happening in your community and which organizations are working on it. And then also seeing what city, state, federal organizations are doing about health disparities as well. It's a little tricky to kind of be a little bit more specific, but I would just say start at your community level.
I'd also say do some research into your local hospitals. I know that I am a part of a couple of initiatives around health. And they're, they're very small, they're very underfunded, they're kind of like grassroots, but they're there. And so that, I think that's a great place to start. They're already trying to do some work. They're already trying to figure out how to, get themselves in a place of power and position to be able to advocate based on health disparities. And so that might already be happening, and joining a coalition of those folks might be a great way to start too.
So I'm going to make this, thank you so much, Precious and Maryam. I'm going to make this the last question. So self-care, what do you all do for self-care?
And eat.
Me personally, it was hard to start. So I would just continuously work multiple, like my full-time job with multiple side jobs. But it's important to take time for yourself, whatever works for you. Me, I do random things. Like I make T-shirts. It was just something fun that I thought I could do, and I just kind of zone out and do that. And it's fun for me. I have my family. I make sure I take time with my family, and I make sure when I'm working to this time, and then I got to do what I got to do. When I first started in the field, I was just 24/7, and I'm working with, my job isn't a regular 9 to 5. I kind of have to we meet our clients where they're at, which can be tough. So the job can almost feel like 24/7, but I had to get to a point where it's like, all right, I'm not working on Saturdays. It's not something I do, and I had to let my clients know, let the people know I work with, because they, some jobs will, let you work. If you got to do something positive and to a high degree, and they'll let you work as much as you want to work. So it's definitely important to set those boundaries for yourself. Um, just enjoy life as much as you can. And that's pretty much what I have on my personal experience.
Thanks, Landon.
I just want to add, yeah, I just want to add, social workers who work in macro social work, we are not immune to burnout and compassion fatigue. There are days where I am meeting with legislators from 9 a.m. up until 6 p.m., back-to-back meetings all day long. It's incredibly stressful, it's incredibly hectic, and it's exhausting. And so thinking about, what you need to nourish yourself. I love to run, so I try to run at least, even as little as 5 to 10 minutes every single day, just so I can clear my head. That's what really works for me. But finding out what works for you. Also, what Landon had talked about, thinking about what your boundaries are and communicating that not only with your clients, but with your supervisor as well. And so those days when I am back to back all day long, letting my supervisor telling her that, but then also letting her know, is it all right if I take a little bit of time off on Friday, so I can reset and rejuvenate.
I'd also ditto what both of you have just said. For me, it really is about boundaries because race is so personal to me. It's so personal to I'm so passionate about it as a job, but also it's very personal to me as a Black woman. And so I have to learn boundaries. Like when I first took this job, I was answering emails at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. I was watching police shooting videos. I was just trying to stay up and learn as much as I could. And I got burnt out very quickly trying to do all that because it just made me really sad and depressed. And I was ready to give up. Like I was just like, I am not cut out for this position. And then I really, really had to establish those boundaries, and to the point to where like my best friend will say, "Do you want to watch this movie? It's about racism," and I'm like, "Nah, I'm cool. I talk about that all day." Like I have to cut it off. I can't do it. I have to, said, and some of my boundaries sound ridiculous to other people. Like I don't post about race on my social media because I have a different social media in which I'm at work posting about race all day long. So I don't bring it home. And so I have had to really set those boundaries. And that is absolutely the best self-care that I've and absolutely looking at this from a strength-based perspective instead of a deficit perspective has also helped in my own self-care.
Rachel?
I'd say really making sure you're setting boundaries and trying to stick to them. I think it's really tempting to want to look at your email, even though you're supposed to be on your day off. At least for me. But I think it is important just to try to stick to that. If you decide to be taking this amount of time, like because I am self-employed, I kind of get to decide when I take my vacations. But just knowing that if I decide that I'm going to be taking this week off, that I'm just not going to be doing any work. I think just being mindful of what your limits are and making sure that you're communicating that, knowing that it's okay to just kind of step away from things when you need to, and finding hobbies that you can do that you enjoy that, kind of that way you're not just solely focused on work all the time. That's really helpful.
Thanks, Rachel. Okay, well, I think that's the end of our question and answer portion. We have like 5 minutes left. Just a quick, heads up, following this webinar session, we're going to send out some resources along with the link to the recording of this session. And then also like a short evaluation where you can give us some feedback on how you think this went, as well as some other topics you want to learn about that we can present to you in this format. So thanks for your time. Get back to Alberto. Any thoughts?
Thank you, Tamari. Well, first off, I really want to thank you all for joining us. We had about 100 people join us, so that was really wonderful. I really want to thank Tamari, Willis, and Becky Sanders for co-organizing this, and really glad I was able to facilitate. But most importantly, this wouldn't be possible without our awesome panelists. So thank you so much Maryam Kiefer, Precious Price, Landon Osborn, and Rachel West. Thank you so much. I think I learned a lot too. I learned a lot from these panels as well. And I know some of you in the question in the chat box, some of you really wanted to get in contact personally with some of these participants. So we'll send them their emails so you can get in contact with them, and any other resources that they may have to offer, we'll send them to you too. But thank you so much. And we hope to do something like this again in the future. And stay safe and healthy. Thank you.
Roberto and Becky, can you please stay on? Is that possible? For like 2 minutes?
Yes.
Thank you, Alberto, and everyone for
you.
setting this up and inviting us.
So much, panelists.
Thank you.